Laredo, Texas, September 22nd, 2020. The early morning heat rolled over the quiet border city, the kind of stillness where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. On a calm street lined with pastel-colored homes, the Muñoz house looked like every other. Tidy lawn, children's toys in the yard, and behind its doors, a young family that seemed to have everything. But inside, tragedy was waiting. At 6:31 a.m., emergency dispatchers in Webb County received a frantic call from 35-year-old Joel Pellot, a nurse anesthetist at Laredo Medical Center. His voice was urgent but strangely controlled. "My wife isn't breathing," he said. "She took too many pills. Please hurry." Minutes later, paramedics stepped through the doorway and froze. At the base of the staircase lay Maria Muñoz, 31, mother of 2, unresponsive. She looked peaceful, almost asleep, but her skin was pale and her pulse was gone. Joel hovered nearby, explaining that Maria suffered from anxiety and must have overdosed on her prescription medication, clonazepam. At first glance, it could have been true. The bottles were there, the story sounded believable. But something about the scene didn't sit right. On Maria's left arm, a paramedic noticed a tiny puncture, clean, deliberate, like the kind left by a medical needle. Near the stairs, a used IV catheter and pieces of tubing were scattered, items you'd expect in a hospital, not in a suburban home. When asked, Joel said he had tried to start an IV line to help her breathe. It sounded plausible. After all, he worked with anesthetics every day. Still, the detail stuck with them. By the time Maria reached the hospital, she was gone. Joel told doctors she'd been depressed, that she'd talked about ending her life, that he'd done everything he could to save her. To police, it looked like a tragic suicide. At least for now. The report listed possible overdose, toxicology pending. In the days that followed, Laredo grieved. Joel planned the funeral, accepted condolences, and appeared heartbroken. But Maria's family, her parents and her sister, Veronica, couldn't accept it. They knew Maria's heart, her love for her children, her plans for the future. She'd been redecorating the house, signing her daughter up for dance lessons, and talking about returning to work. None of it matched the story of a woman ready to die. When her family began sorting through her things, they found a small box filled with notebooks, Maria's personal journals. Each page told a different truth. In her gentle handwriting, she wrote about loneliness, fear, and the quiet unraveling of her marriage. "He doesn't look at me the same," one entry said. "It's like I'm invisible." Another read, "I keep trying to fix what's broken, but I feel smaller every day." Her words weren't suicidal. They were the reflections of someone desperate to be seen, not someone preparing to end her life. Weeks later, the toxicology report arrived, and with it, a revelation that would shatter Joel's story. There was no clonazepam in Maria's system. None. Instead, examiners found a deadly combination of 7 powerful anesthetic drugs: propofol, midazolam, lidocaine, and others used only in surgical settings. They weren't swallowed, they were injected. The puncture on her arm suddenly made sense. Investigators turned their focus on Joel. At the hospital, they reviewed drug inventory logs and discovered he had checked out several of those same medications in the days before Maria's death. Drugs he never returned. When questioned, Joel claimed Maria must have taken them herself. But she wasn't a nurse, had no medical training, and couldn't have known how to mix or inject those compounds safely. His story began to crumble. Detectives noticed his demeanor too, calm, careful, never once slipping into genuine shock. It was as if he had rehearsed his answers. The more they looked, the more they realized the overdose story didn't fit. Maria hadn't swallowed anything. She'd been injected with substances only a medical professional could control, someone who understood how to silence a heartbeat without leaving a trace. As the weeks turned into months, Maria's family fought to keep her case alive. They refused to let her become another forgotten statistic. Veronica contacted every agency she could, medical boards, prosecutors, local reporters. Her persistence worked. The case was reopened as a homicide. A new team of forensic experts reviewed the evidence and concluded Maria was likely sedated first, then given a fatal dose while unconscious, an execution disguised as compassion. The drugs acted quickly. She would have slipped away within minutes. There were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing that suggested she even knew what was happening. To the outside world, Joel Pellot was still the grieving husband, the man who lost his wife in a tragic accident. But behind closed doors, detectives were now calling him something else, a suspect. They had the motive, the access, and the knowledge, but what they needed next was proof of intent. Why would a man who had everything, a career, a home, a family, choose to kill his wife in cold blood? As investigators dug into his personal life, they began to uncover answers Maria had hinted at in her journals: emotional distance, infidelity, financial stress, and a marriage built on appearances rather than love. The perfect couple of Laredo was beginning to look like a facade, one that had been cracking long before Maria's final night alive. What no one knew yet was how deep those cracks truly ran, and just how far Joel Pellot was willing to go to protect his image when everything started falling apart. By early 2021, the once harmonious Muñoz household in Laredo had changed into a place of tension and quiet dread. Maria's smile, which once seemed to light up every room, had dimmed. Friends noticed the difference immediately. She had grown thinner, more distracted, and her once bright laughter had been replaced by anxious glances and soft sighs. Yet she tried to hide it. She wanted to believe things could return to normal. Joel, however, had grown colder. He worked long shifts at the hospital as a nurse anesthetist, often claiming he was too tired to talk or spend time with the family. Maria suspected something was wrong. His phone, once left on the counter without a thought, was now always locked, tucked away in his pocket. His temper, once rare, began to flash over the smallest disagreements. But Maria, a woman raised to keep her family together, chose silence. She prayed instead. Behind that silence, however, Joel was living another life. He had been seeing another woman, a colleague from the hospital named Erica. Their relationship started as flirtation, a way for Joel to escape what he described as the pressure of home life. But soon, it became an obsession. Erica was younger, carefree, and didn't question him the way Maria did. He told her he was trapped in a loveless marriage. He painted himself as the victim, as men like Joel often do when they want to justify their betrayal. Maria found hints, receipts, messages that didn't add up, strange calls late at night, but she couldn't yet bring herself to confront him directly. She believed confrontation would only make things worse. Instead, she confided in her mother and a close friend, saying she felt like something terrible was coming. "I don't feel safe," she whispered one night during a phone call, but she never said why. In March 2021, neighbors began hearing shouting late at night. Nothing too loud, but enough to notice. One neighbor remembered Joel storming out of the house, slamming the door and driving away, leaving Maria alone in the yard with tears streaking her face. The next morning, she smiled like nothing had happened, sending her kids off to school and heading to work. She was trying to hold everything together, unaware that the thread she was clinging to was already beginning to snap. Joel's affair deepened, and with it, his frustration toward Maria grew. He felt cornered, trapped between his double life and the image he had to maintain. To him, Maria wasn't just his wife anymore. She had become an obstacle. His behavior became erratic. Co-workers noticed him lashing out, seeming paranoid and avoiding eye contact. He was drinking more too. There were whispers that he had been taking sedatives from the hospital supply, drugs only someone in his position could access. Then, on April 6, 2021, everything changed. That morning, Maria texted her sister, saying she wasn't feeling well. "My head hurts," she wrote. "Joel gave me something to help me sleep last night, but I still feel dizzy." That was the last message she ever sent. Later that day, Joel called 911, claiming he had found his wife unresponsive in bed. He told dispatchers she had taken sleeping pills and wasn't breathing. When paramedics arrived, Maria was already gone. Joel's story seemed rehearsed. He said Maria had been depressed, that she had taken her own life. He even produced a note, a short, strangely formal letter typed on the family computer. But the handwriting didn't match Maria's usual style, and her family immediately doubted it. Something about it felt off, as if it had been written by someone who wanted to be believed too badly. The autopsy revealed traces of anesthesia drugs in Maria's system, the kind used in hospitals, not something available at home. The dosage was enough to cause respiratory failure. Investigators quickly realized that Joel, as a nurse anesthetist, had access to exactly those medications. They searched his work locker and found missing vials of propofol and midazolam. When confronted, Joel tried to explain it away. He said Maria might have taken them herself, that she knew about the drugs because he often talked about work, but detectives weren't buying it. They reviewed the couple's messages, financial records, and Joel's internet searches. One search stood out: how to make someone sleep permanently. By the time police pieced everything together, Joel had already left town. He was found 2 days later at a relative's house in another city, disoriented, with an empty bottle of pills nearby. He claimed he had tried to end his life after losing Maria, but his story was falling apart. When officers questioned him again, inconsistencies piled up. Times that didn't match, statements that contradicted what neighbors had heard, and a coldness that chilled even the investigators. As Maria's family prepared for her funeral, rumors began to spread through Laredo. People whispered about the handsome nurse and his perfect marriage that had ended in tragedy. Some refused to believe he could do it. Others had suspected all along that something was wrong in that house. In the end, it was Maria's sister who pushed investigators to dig deeper. She handed them old texts and voicemails from Maria that showed a woman living in fear, worried about what her husband might do. It became the foundation of the case, a portrait of a woman who saw her own death coming but couldn't escape it. By the summer of 2021, the facade of the perfect couple had been shattered. Joel was arrested and charged with murder. And as the trial approached, the details that surfaced would reveal just how deliberate and how cruel his plan really was. The courtroom would expose secrets that no one in Laredo had been prepared to hear, peeling back every layer of deceit that Joel had built. But justice for Maria would not come easily. It would require her family to relive every moment of her pain, and for the city to confront the chilling truth of what had happened inside that quiet suburban home. The courthouse in Webb County, Texas, was packed on the morning of Joel Pellot's first hearing. Laredo had never seen such a case. A respected medical professional accused of killing his own wife with the very drugs meant to save lives. Outside, the air was heavy, the murmurs of reporters blending with the low sobs of Maria's family. Her mother clutched a framed photo of her daughter. Maria in a white blouse, her smile wide and full of life. The kind of smile that belonged to someone who believed in goodness, in second chances, in love. Inside the courtroom, Joel sat at the defense table, dressed neatly in a suit that couldn't hide the fatigue on his face. He avoided looking at Maria's family, choosing instead to stare straight ahead. The prosecution opened their case with chilling clarity. This was not a crime of passion, but a calculated act of betrayal. Joel had used his medical knowledge to poison his wife, administering lethal doses of propofol and midazolam, substances he stole from the hospital, and then tried to stage the scene as a suicide. The motive, prosecutors argued, was his affair and the desire to free himself from a marriage he no longer wanted without the financial and emotional cost of divorce. The evidence was devastating. Forensic experts testified about the drug levels in Maria's body, explaining that no one outside a medical field could have obtained or administered them safely. The toxicology reports matched the same drugs that had gone missing from Joel's workplace. Investigators found his search history on his personal laptop. Phrases like "death by anesthesia" and "fastest way to die in sleep" appeared alongside messages he had exchanged with his mistress, discussing their plans once everything was over. The jury sat in stunned silence as those words were read aloud. Maria's sister, Angela, took the stand next. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. She told the jury about the messages Maria sent in the days before her death, how she feared her husband and felt that something terrible was coming. She wanted to believe he would change, Angela said softly, her eyes fixed on Joel. But she also said, "If anything happens to me, don't let them say I did it to myself." Her words hung in the air like a haunting echo, the voice of a woman who had sensed her own fate. The defense tried to paint a different picture. They argued that Maria had been depressed, overwhelmed by family pressures, and that Joel was being framed by circumstantial evidence. They claimed the affair was a mistake, not a motive. But the more they spoke, the weaker their story became. Every defense witness seemed uncertain, and every explanation contradicted something already proven. The prosecutor's closing argument was simple but powerful. Joel Pellot had the access, the knowledge, and the motive. He thought if he made it look like she chose to die, no one would question him. But Maria's voice, through her words, her family, and the truth in this evidence, tells us otherwise. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was silent. Joel stood as the verdict was read, guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence, life in prison without parole. Maria's family wept quietly, relief and grief mixing into something indescribable. Joel showed little emotion, only lowering his head slightly as deputies moved to escort him away. For the first time since his arrest, the man who once controlled every detail of his life had no power left at all. But even with justice served, the pain did not fade. For Maria's children, the world had changed forever. They were now orphans, one parent buried, the other behind bars. Maria's mother took custody of them, determined to raise them in the kind of love their mother had always wanted for them. "They will know who she was," she told a reporter months later. "They will know she was good, and they will know she did not choose to leave them." In the months after the trial, Maria's story spread far beyond Laredo. News outlets across Texas covered the case, calling it a tragedy born of betrayal. People were struck not just by the brutality of the act, but by the way it had been hidden behind the facade of a perfect marriage. Maria became a symbol, a reminder that behind many quiet smiles there can exist silent suffering. At the house on the corner of that quiet street in Laredo, the grass grew taller and the curtains stayed closed. Neighbors said they still sometimes saw people stop by, a relative perhaps, or an old friend, to leave flowers at the porch. Time had moved on, but the shadow of what happened there never really left. Joel was sent to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, where he began serving his life sentence. Reports later revealed that he kept mostly to himself, rarely speaking to other inmates. Those who encountered him said he still insisted he was innocent, even though the evidence against him was overwhelming. In his mind, perhaps, he had rewritten the story, made himself the victim of circumstance, the man who lost everything because of a mistake. But outside the prison walls, no one saw him that way. For Maria's family, healing came slowly. Her mother often visited the small cemetery where Maria was buried. She would bring fresh flowers, brush the dust off the headstone, and talk to her daughter as if she was still there. "You deserved better," she would whisper. "But you're at peace now." Maria's sister started a small foundation in her name, helping women in troubled relationships find resources and support before it was too late. The organization's motto was simple: listen when someone says they're scared. Years later, the story of Maria Muñoz still lingers in Laredo. People remember the beautiful woman who loved deeply, who believed in family, who trusted too much. They remember how easily appearances can deceive, how danger can wear the face of someone who says they love you. In the end, Maria's voice, silenced by betrayal, became something stronger than Joel ever imagined. It became a warning, a legacy, and a promise that her story would not be forgotten. Her name lives on in the people she touched, in the children she loved, and in every woman who finds the courage to leave before it's too late. And though her life ended within the quiet walls of that suburban home, the truth she left behind still echoes through every courtroom, every shelter, every heart that hears her story. Because the story of Maria Muñoz is not just about death, it's about the unbreakable will of those who demand